Awesome, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of It Is What It Is podcast. Like, I appreciate everyone. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you watching this. I appreciate you supporting this. And if you want to keep supporting this, you got to do two things. You got to follow me on my two favorite platforms. The first one is Instagram, CVMK33. And the second one on YouTube at CV Space K. We are where all podcasts are heard. And I do mean all. I mean, if your preference is Stitcher, Google, Anchor, Spotify, Apple, however, wherever, we are there. I hope I'm on Audible. I'm still waiting for that confirmation to come through. Jeff Bezos, holla at me. I have an amazing guest and an amazing episode focusing on being vulnerable enough to heal. I have the amazing, the talented, the one, the only, Stephanie. Stephanie, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
What a bright introduction. I was like, oh, I feel like I should get up and walk in. I mean, I don't know.
You're good. You're good. I'm excited to have you. Thank you so much for being on here.
Me.
Anytime. Look, we connected and we talked about, where the focus should go, right? And you were transparent. First of all, I appreciate your transparency. Anytime anybody shares a story with you, that is to be noted, right? We talked about dealing with mental health and addressing these issues, these wounds that a lot of times we just totally ignore. And if you are a member like we are of the Black community, African American community, the diaspora, however you want to phrase it, I don't even know what the appropriate terminology anymore is. It keeps changing from day to day, but it is, like you mentioned, it is a big umbrella, and mental health still is taboo. We obviously know we're affected, right? We obviously know we're hurting. We have a populace that is hurting,
right?
But actually having the courage to go through the process is another thing. So before we get into it, what made you say I have to start healing?
It actually, I think, because, full disclosure, I'll be 40 this year. It was around my 32nd birthday, I think. Let's see. Hold on. How old's my nephew? Around 31st. 31st was like a weird year for me. Like for a week around my birthday, I was crying every day. Like I was just miserable. And it was just like, one, I essentially had been off and on therapy, but I didn't find my therapist, aka my person. I tell a lot of people when they're like, I want to get into therapy, I'm like, just realize the first person you go to is probably not going to be the person you're going to stick with. And after a while, once you get a good relationship with them, then they'll become your person, because I have my person now. So it's weird not to be in person with her because of COVID. So it's like we have to do it by, it's telemedicine because that's a new thing. And I'm like, oh God, I miss just sitting in her presence. I don't know what it is. But that moment of hitting a wall of, I'm not only just harming myself mentally, but I'm actually lashing out to people that I love, because I had a very big, and it's like weird to say, but heartbreak. And it's kind of like, as someone who has dealt with self-esteem issues my entire life, someone who has literally been, I'm a reformed people pleaser. So I have used to being a doormat and just doing what everybody wants. And the reason I'm doing it is because I don't want people not to like me. So it's like anytime like I'm running myself ragged, trying to please everybody and be everybody's jolly fat friend. I'm going to tell anybody who's listening who is fat right now, baby, please stop that. It's like, they don't have to tell you anything. You are beautiful the way you are. You are handsome the way you are. And you don't have to bend yourself up, because the people around you that you're bending for, they're not bending for you. They're giving you, they have their standard, and it's okay for you to have a standard. So I had a bad heartbreak, and I was just a miserable person to be around. And my mother and I were actually going to the supermarket giant, and like we were getting out of the car, and she said, stop, I need to tell you something. I need you to go to therapy. I need you to go because you are harming yourself and it is scaring me. I'm worried about you. And she had never said that to me. And I was just like, oh. So then I started my journey on getting a therapist. The first therapist I went to literally wanted to put me on medication. And Essex, and I was like, girl, are you nuts? I'm not going on, because once you go on those kind of medications, it's so hard. You can't just start and stop it. You just can't. They can lower your dosage or they can increase it, but it's like go from 0 to, it's not going to work. So I was like, I don't know if I like that. And then I did find a person, and then I I went to them for a couple of years, and then I lost my job and my insurance changed and I had to stop. And then I went about it a different way. So I had a friend who is in social work, and I have a friend who's a therapist. And I asked both of them, I'm like, I'm looking for a therapist. They're like, what kind of therapist you want? I'm like, I want a Christian therapist. I want a Black woman. And I found my person. And that's how it is. So then it started with us meeting close to my where I was living at the time, and we would meet, and it was great. Then she decided to strike out on her own with her own business, and she was like, I'm letting people know if you want to stay, it's okay. And I was like, will you take my insurance? She's like, oh yeah, I'm filling out for all insurances. And I was like, oh yeah, so I'm going with you. And that was fine. So she went from meeting me where like maybe 5 minutes from my house to the other side of the city. And that's how much my mental health mattered to me. It was like, oh, it's on the other side of the city. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. It's like, yeah, I don't care, because I think about the work that I have been doing on myself, and it's been facilitated by someone, one, a Black woman who looks like me, and also someone who actually cares. And so for me, I tell a lot of Black women, it's like, you probably have seen this if you Google it, how Black women definitely say having a therapist who looks like me, a Black woman, it means so much. It just resonates with you differently. This is why I always tell people like, oh, I'm looking for different therapists. Where should I start? I'm like, well, if you're a Black woman, start a therapy for Black girls. Start with her site. She built that up really nicely, and she has a directory. Like, I'm trying to get my therapist in that directory. I'm like, you should be in this directory because you're very good at your job. But definitely start branching out. And if you know other women, ask them. They're like, where did you find your therapist? Oh, I found them on this website. Oh, I can see if I can get a referral. It's like you got to use your network, because I think if I was just going by myself, I probably wouldn't have found my therapist. It's a very long answer.
No, you're good. No, thank you. And that's why I think, diversity is so needed. One of the things that you hit on, I think, two parts. The first part is probably either recognizing the signs, or somebody being close enough to you to recognize the signs.
Mm-hmm.
What are those signs? Because I think we all need a process, and we all need counseling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is like that? Like, oh no, is there like an oh no moment?
I think there is a oh no moment. I think mine was that I'm generally a happy person, but I'm also talkative, hence why I have a podcast. But I think I got very quiet. I basically retreated into myself, and my mother noticed it. She was like, you just say, it's like you asked me a question. It's like I was very curt and I was very sharp. And my mother noticed it. Like, this isn't, like, are you okay? And it was just because I was so angry at what was going on. I'm angry that I let someone in my life, and I ignored all the red signs, all the red flags, all the bad signs, all the signs that said you should not be with this person. And the only reason why I didn't is because I'm like, I didn't want to be alone. So that's why I just ignored it. And then it was like, after a while, it's like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And so it's the feeling of you're mad at yourself. And it's just like, I can't believe how stupid I'm being. And it's like, you're beating yourself up. That's when you know you need to talk to someone, where it's like, I might need to change my thinking, because beating up yourself is just not how you heal. You'll be like, oh my God, I'm such a stupid person. It's like, no, you're human. You're just a person. It's like mistakes are literally human nature. It's like, yeah, there's only one perfect person, and he was on a cross.
Yeah, and he died.
So
right.
He died. Right. And it's like, he died a perfect person. That's the only person who ever died perfect. Yeah. There's no way you can be. And it's okay to make mistakes. Because if you never make mistakes, you never grow.
Message.
It's like, you're not going to grow at all.
Yeah. That makes sense. How, you finding your person, I think, you know, if you hear that, I live in Chicago, so you might as well hear anything, any type of siren, anything. So, you know, weather's getting warm,
Ah,
and you know things happen.
I
You
am
know,
from
so
Chicago. I am from Chicago.
right, you gotta throw the
Send
little,
me
you know,
some deep dish. What you
break
got?
in the series. But you know, finding your person, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm sure that was difficult because, first of all, it's not like diversity is a buzzword right now. It's not even like a true implementation, right? So, as much as we want these
Diversity, add a black person. So that's not diversity.
exactly.
So I need you to stop.
Right. And,
Like,
and that's how a lot of
yeah.
that's how a lot of industries and companies approach it, right?
Mhm.
Because they don't value human beings as a whole. So it's like, oh well, that just means we gotta add, you know, we gotta look for that one, right?
Yeah.
So
It's like, yeah, so there's diversity within every ethnic group, every
yeah,
culture. And like, so like I have an Asian person. So are they Korean, Chinese, Mandarin, Hmong, so Indian, which what do you mean Indian? India's in South Asia.
right,
What? I'm like,
right. Yeah. And that's why a lot of, because we have the literally the lack of representation. Can you, like, what was like when you first got paired and that person didn't look like you? That
yeah,
didn't, you know, like, what was that like experience to sit there and be like, because I'm sure, you know, we think about everything that transpired last year, and I know a thought had to be like, do you like me? Do you love me? You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe
that was
internally,
homegirl. That was a woman who wanted to put me on medicine. I was like, yes, I'm gonna get you on this medicine. What? It's like you have not even had it was the first meeting of her.
oh
And
wow,
I was just like, you want to put me on medicine and you've only spent like maybe 45 minutes. And I was like, I don't know if I like this. And so I remember telling my mother, and she goes, yeah, keep looking, because why would she? I'm like, I have no idea. But there are some people who only believe in chemical ways to regulate moods. And it's like, yeah, everybody doesn't need medication. So there are some people who do. And it's like, when you do, you have to find that right mix, because that also takes time. They can be like, I'm going to start you in this. And then that one gives you screaming nightmares. Okay, so we're going to change your medication because we don't want any more screaming nightmares with you. It's like, if you see any of those commercials, like commercials, not even infomercials, commercials for antidepressant medicine, you see all the stuff and you hear all the side effects and you're like, wait, what? Like, oh, but then it's like, there are people who need that kind of intervention to function. And it's like, wow. And you have to run the gamut of, I could harm myself. I'm like, that's just a lot for me. So it was like, seeing her was just like, yeah, no, I cannot talk about my whole Black woman life with this white lady with blonde hair. It's not going to work for me. I'm like, I need a Black woman who looks like me. Quite frankly, I can't. I just can't. It sounds bad, but it's like, I'm sorry, lady, you're probably really nice, but you're not who I need to talk to at all.
Do you ever feel that because of the historical incidents that have happened, like Tuskegee, right? This distrust of the medical community from the Black community is not only valid, but until at least an apology, right? Like, I don't know about you, I've never heard anybody say I'm sorry for slavery. Like, I'm sorry, this the basics. We're talking about a bill.
Talk about it.
We're not talking about
talk about it.
Right, legislation. We're just talking about hey, I'm sorry for owning you. Like, do you think that it starts there?
No, because there's literally no apology. There's no. Webster has not invented enough words for what slavery has done to the world, because America wasn't the only place they had slavery.
Right.
Technically, January 1st, 1863 is when the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. June 19th, 1865 is when the Black people in Texas found out, oh yeah, y'all been free for like over 2 years. It's like, yeah. And 30 years before 1863, England ended their slavery. So it's like they ended not that long before us. And it's like, you look at the two, like our two countries, and it's about the same thing. It's like slavery
Yeah.
was like throughout the world. It's like everybody's like, hey, if you want work done, go get you some people from that little continent called Africa and bring them all over. Because slaves got dropped off in the US, they got in Britain, in South America, in the Caribbean. Hence why we have Afro Latina people. Since I am someone who works in the medical field, yeah. So for everybody who may not know this, and so in medical books, especially for childbirth, they used to be in the books that Black women had a higher, genetically higher threshold for pain. That used to be taught to doctors, that it was okay not to give Black women medication or any kind of like anesthesia for childbirth because we were genetically able to have a higher threshold of pain, which is not true. We see medical racism to this day. Tuskegee, it's interesting because the experiment, they didn't give them anything. They just didn't treat they had latent syphilis. They just didn't treat them. They stopped, like I think they lost the funding and they just let these people die. Mm-hmm. It's like so when people when the vaccine came up, they're like, oh, well, you mean like Tuskegee? No, not like Tuskegee, because they didn't give them syphilis. They did have syphilis. They were trying to show how to treat them. And then they just say, you know what? I'm bored. Let me just go color something else and then let all these people die. And let's not even talk about Henrietta Lacks.
Right.
Because I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. So literally everybody knows about Henrietta Lacks because that happened at Hopkins. So it's like there's a distrust because people are not forthcoming. So when they were talking about doing trials for COVID, they were like, we can't get Black people to come and do these trials. I'm like, because they have so many reasons not to trust you. It's like, it's like Black maternal health and Black maternal deaths in this country is just tragic. There's no reason why a very healthy Black woman comes in to give birth and dies because y'all didn't pay attention to her. And it's like, you're like, oh no, her husband is like, hey, so there's blood in her urine. I don't think this is supposed to happen. There's no way that Serena Williams should get up out of her bed and say something is wrong with me. Beyonce should not be saying, hey, something is wrong with me. You guys are the medical staff. And everybody was like talking about, oh, it's just low-income women. Serena Williams is not a low-income woman, and they weren't listening to her either. So it's like for Black women, it's like we don't get the care and like hospitals when it comes to our giving birth to children. That's why some Black women are now turning to doulas because they actually do care. So it's kind of like, why are you going with like doulas and midwives? I'm like, because one, Black doulas are a thing. We all know one. Her name is Erykah Badu. It's like, yeah, it's like we're switching to that because we need someone who's going to care about us. And for a lot of Black people in general, because we're going to talk about high blood pressure, we're going to talk about diabetes, this stuff goes unnoticed. And I lost a friend who his team didn't care about him. They were just like, oh, you're like, because this is pre-COVID. So it's kind of like we're thinking, did he have COVID? And it's like he lost tons of weight before he passed. And it was just like, how? And he's like, I can't keep nothing down. I can't eat. And I'm like, have you been to the doctor? He's like, yeah. And they just told me this. And I was like, and then he passed away. And I was just like, because it's kind of like people like get you in and get you out. And then sometimes I think for a lot of Black people, that's why they don't trust doctors. Because some of them, like I tell my doctor stuff and I'm like, oh, it's nothing. Just lose weight. Mm-hmm. It's like, so that's, as someone who is been fat for a very long time and people are like, do you have this, this, and this? I go, no. And they look at me like, what do you mean no? I'm like, yeah, being fat doesn't mean I'm unhealthy. There's a lot of thin people who are like in their 30s. They diabetes too. They're like, how do you get type 2 diabetes? It's for fat people. It's not. That's not how insulin works. That's not how pancreas works. I know plenty of people who are like smaller than me and they have type 2. I don't. It's like, yeah, there's people with, like heart disease is a silent killer of Black women because one, what tests do you do regularly to detect your heart? You have pulmonary embolisms, you have heart attacks, you have seizures. It's like, it's so much. It's so much. And it's like when you work in the health field, you understand why as a Black person, or let's like expand it. If you're an indigenous person, if you're a Hispanic or a Latinx person, you have a reason to be a little bit untrustworthy of the healthcare system, because you have to look at the history. And until people actually recognize, hey, we did people pretty bad. We treated our slaves like guinea pigs. Proper. It's like, like we came here as bales of hay. So we'd be like, how come y'all not further? It's like, because when Emancipation Proclamation, you just told them get off the plantation. You didn't give them a job. You didn't give them any. You didn't land. You didn't give them a place to go. So a lot of them stayed because they're like, "What am I going to do? I have a family."
Yeah.
Welcome sharecropping.
Right. What should the medical community be focusing on now? It's hard because there's so many layers to it, right? Even when I think of the funding that we need, like I still don't understand why we don't have universal healthcare as just all, right? Like people shouldn't be paying copays, like it should be part of our system just because we're an American citizen, right? But unfortunately, we have a lot that disagree with that. They have the right to disagree. It don't make it right, but they have the right to disagree. Correct. What should the medical community be focusing on? Because there is not only historical evidence of abuse, there's also the willingness not to own it and not just but make amends toward repairing. So it's like you're dealing with this complex layer, and because it is so complex, the status quo just keeps going on. Well, get a good job, get insurance, and so it's like we'll just ignore this while we still have this issue. So how should the medical community attempt to make reconciliation?
So first, recognize that there's a reason why people don't trust medical professionals, because a lot of people run our hospitals like businesses, because a lot of them it's a business. It's no longer this is to help people. It's more like, what's our bottom line? We have to get to the point, because when you talk about universal healthcare, we're looking at other countries' structures, and they don't have the problems that we have. Hence why Italy can shut down their whole country, quarantine for COVID, and it's gone after a few weeks. We're almost to the year since we shut down, and it's not anywhere near it. And it's mostly because they paid people to stay home. They paid people. They stopped rent, they stopped mortgage, and I don't know if it was 100% your salary or like 80%. Other countries actually gave people like monthly stipends to stay home. We didn't. And they're like, how did y'all get rid of it? We stayed home. I'm like, but I have to work. I still got my salary. And it was kind of like, we're seen as a superpower. And you see, in the age of COVID, are we really a superpower? Because we don't have universal healthcare. They fought it tooth and nail. It's like they didn't want to have, they kept calling it Obamacare instead of Affordable Care Act, because one, there was like this big disjointed thing. College students aren't all graduating at 24. So here it is. It's about the dollar. The fact that if you look at someone who has a baby or goes to the ER, they itemize everything. If you have 3 boxes of tissues, they're charging you for it. It's like, this is ridiculous at this point. We overcharge. Do you know, like, the actual price of a heart transplant is probably $500,000. It's just like, it's so much, and it's not, and mind you, that Affordable Care Act document, hundreds of pages that people literally in Congress said they didn't even read. I didn't read all of that. Hi, I am not going to read all that. You are voting on this. How are y'all not reading this? And it's kind of like, because it's so, I don't want to say divisive. It's such a partisan issue. And I'm like, we're talking about healthcare. That is a bipartisan issue. It really should be. But for everybody, it's like, I can't let my side lose. It's like, these are people that are dying. There are people who literally, if it wasn't for the Affordable Care Act, they wouldn't have healthcare. Now, I think you've been between jobs, and you know about COBRA. Cobra is one of these things where it's like, it is a terrible idea.
It is.
Cobra is a terrible idea. Just like, oh, okay, I see you're leaving your job. So if you want to keep the same insurance you have, you're going to have to pay us $475 a month. I'm sorry, I don't have a job. What do you mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, what? It's like Cobra, like insurance. I actually got into a debate with a guy. He was like, what do you mean? It's like, why aren't you talking about the business? I'm like, I'm talking about the person who is going through COVID, who is like lost his job. He has a family and a wife, and he sees his Cobra bill. It is a terrible thing for people. I don't care about these insurance companies. I care about the people. It's like, yeah, if I just lost my job, I can't pay $400 or $500 a month for health insurance when I don't have a job. I'm looking for a job. It's so much that needs to be changed. You're probably old enough to remember HMOs and the big Kaiser debacle.
I remember that.
Where literally it was like you had to call you couldn't even, I'm having a heart attack. Can't go to the hospital. Got to call Kaiser to say, oh, you can go to this hospital. It's 45 minutes away.
Yep.
And that's what used to have to happen. I'm like, I'm so glad they're gone. I think some people have them, but it's like no one really picks them anymore. But still, though, it's like that's the kind of like case study and just terrible that we saw. It's like it's just gross for no apparent reason.
Let's go here. As a person of faith, and so are you, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things, like you mentioned. The only one that's perfect is Jesus, right? He's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But sometimes church isn't, right? So when it comes to mental health, it's happening. When it comes to mental health, mm-hmm. It's like we don't know how to even discuss it. It's like a 4-letter word, right? Mm-hmm. And it's taboo, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like, this issue. It should be something that should be, as human as breathing. Mm-hmm. How? Let me phrase this question correctly. Mm-hmm. How should we walk with our fellow believers, with our fellow humans in Christ that are struggling and they have this, and not to demonize them and not to make this seem like a completely separate issue, like their issue is greater than something else, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
So the first thing being that if we know that God is all powerful, he is all knowing, there's no possible way you can be on this planet and don't think that God doesn't use people. That includes mental health professionals. There are a lot of Christians or of any faith that are mental health professionals, social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists. There's no way you can go like, oh, I don't need to do it because that's of the world. I'm like, yeah, he uses everyone. It's really like yes. So we need to walk that back. And sometimes when there used to be the old adage, because we're old enough to remember, you can be black or you can be crazy, but you can't be black and crazy.
I remember
that. Can't do that here. And it's like, that's the thing that we have to work our way out of. And for some people, they're like, just pray it away and it'll go away. I'm like, and that is not how mental health is. That's not how mental health ever works. And that's just a detriment, because that literally is just signaling that you don't want to help someone. And it's like, there's a whole network of Christian, because my therapist is a Christian. It was a whole network. There's definitely a lot of people. And because we're thinking that if you just pray it away, it's going to go away. And I'm like, yeah, so that's not how any of this works.
Right.
And it takes work. You are a whole person. And sometimes you need more than just prayer. Prayer is like a part of it. You need faith, you need prayer, and you need to realize that you are important enough that you got to do more work. Sometimes it takes more work to like be mentally healthy. Some people like, they don't have these mental health issues. They're just like, I've never felt this way. I've never thought about harming myself. I've never like really can get out of bed because I mentally just could not get out of bed. Like I've never been that down. And it's like, yeah. Because sometimes I think people say, oh, just pray about it and they're not saying it from a good place. They're saying it condescendingly. And I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. It's like, don't do that. It's like, if you are like, oh, okay, I want to pray with you, but I'm also going to give you this list of individuals. Yeah, because mental health professionals go to church too. So there's that. And so everybody who is a officer in your church is not a mental health professional, and they don't have the range or the scope. And it's okay to look outside. There's some people who are, and sometimes you just need people to listen. But yeah, everybody doesn't have the range.
I like that. Range and scope. And scope. You don't have either ors. Like, you might be able to preach, but this you should probably stay away from this, because you're messing everybody up with this one. No,
baby, this ain't your ministry. Your ministry is Bible study, but not my mental health.
Look, Stephanie, Stephanie's amazing, y'all. Connect with Stephanie. Stephanie, tell the people where they can connect with you, where they can follow you, where they can support you, and they can share with you in your journey.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. You can find the Mocha Minutes podcast wherever you find podcasts. Apple, Stitcher, Google Play, Google Podcasts now. Tune in, Castbox. I'm also on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and I think I'm on Audible, and I'm trying to get to Pandora. You can follow the show, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the same handle, Mocha Minutes. If you would like to connect with me, you can also follow me on Twitter at SunnyTwoteThat. I am also, hopefully by, today is March. So by June 1st, 2021, I'll be launching my Patreon. And I'm also getting on Buy Me a Coffee. So buymeacoffee.com/Mocha Minutes. I am on there. So yeah, I think that's all the ways you can contact me.
Look, connect with Stephanie. Support her Patreon when it comes out in June.
Yes.
Support.
I got threatened last night. They're like, when are you going to do it? It's like, yes, just do it because we love you. I was like, okay.
Listen to Mocha Minutes podcast. One of these days, I hope to be on Mocha Minutes podcast.
You definitely do. I would just tell you guys, it's someplace where it's pretty open. This is I'm at the age of being an auntie. I embrace it. I have a nephew, so technically I am an auntie. So because I have a nephew, guys. Okay.
With Stephanie, she's amazing. And if you want to keep seeing amazing influencers like Stephanie, amazing podcast hosts, amazing gifts to humanity, you know what you got to do? You got to subscribe to the YouTube page at YouTube at CV_K. Let me know you're listening. Let me know you like Stephanie's content. I appreciate my guests. Until next time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, what's up, everybody? You like what you saw? Were you entertained? Were you informed? We want to keep seeing amazing content. Subscribe at the link below. YouTube, CV_K. You connect where all podcasts are streaming. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor. Connect with me. I want to connect with you.